welcome back to Stranded in Pittsburgh. Nick, Ethan, and Nate, all three of us back here once again after I was out. What'd you tell them I was doing? Playing charades?
Yeah, playing charades.
Yeah. Playing charades, yes. My charades competition went as well as you would expect. Came in 7th place out of 8 teams. It was a really tough night for us, but it was a good episode last week. These two really carried the Stranded in Pittsburgh banner well. So many thanks to them. And many thanks to the Steelers for giving us something positive to say on this week's episode. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about their upcoming game against the Texans. We'll talk about Pitt and Virginia Tech. And we're going to tell you what we're going to speak on next week. That's right. We're already doing teasers for next week. But before that, here's what we have to say this week. I promise it's worth your time. But fellas, how are we doing? Ethan and I just shared, well, we didn't share. We're not dating. We just had some lackluster Mexican food, and Nate would be glad to tell you all about it if you have any questions.
I think I'm okay. I don't think I want to know.
You probably don't. But thanks, guys, for joining me tonight. And Ethan, the Steelers man of the podcast with your beautiful headphones. Why don't you lead us into our recap of the Steelers-Raiders game?
Yeah, it was a very eye-opening game for this Steelers team, especially from what we saw back when they played Cleveland in week 2. Offense was once again lackluster. Wasn't really much to write home about on that side of the ball. Obviously, they went up for the first 2 weeks of the season against two very talented defenses in the 49ers and Browns, respectively. Week 3, we got a little look at a defense that stepped down from those two, or a step or two down from those two teams. And we saw this offense begin to mold and come together. We saw a lot of good things from Kenny Pickett and this receiving core. Obviously, the Calvin Austin touchdown early on in the game, that deep bomb over the middle, which a lot of people have been clamoring Pickett in this offense to do, is to expand and really try to take more deep shots downfield rather than those short hinky-dink dump-off passes that they normally do. But you got Calvin Austin involved. Pickens also had another very strong game like he did in week 2 against Cleveland. So nice job by the wide receivers there, but also got Pat Freiermuth involved on one of probably their more productive drives of the season, marching down the field methodically in that third quarter. Really looked like they were going to put some things away, put the game away there after that touchdown. Obviously, Steelers had to make it interesting, but that offensive drive really solidified what this offense did Sunday night, and there were a lot of positives to write home about that. And the rushing game started to get some things moving and get some things together. So overall, very good work by the offensive unit after a very 2 lackluster performances early on in the year. And just the defense, they just picked up right where they left off. Really not much more to talk about there other than TJ Watt continuing to dominate up front in the outside linebacker position, and just what he's been able to do along with Alex Highsmith and even Reeves, the rookie defensive lineman out of Alabama. He got a sack there, went basically untouched to Garoppolo late in that game, but just that defense, we talked about it last week with Nate and I. Just talked about they need to be that defense that can flip the script, flip the game, and really take control of the game. And they did just that once again, causing turnovers early in that game. But you got to see the offense kind of also take a step up and really help out the defense as well. So overall, and really all facets, they did a very good job Sunday night against not Oakland.
Whoa.
Vegas.
First you called Twitter X in our group chat, and now you're calling them Oakland. This guy's all over the place. I'll interject really quick. I know everyone wants to hear Nate, but I did want to touch on one thing Ethan said before it got too far removed, and that's the receiving core and who Kenny was distributing the ball to. I think he only had 16 completions, but he made sure everybody got their touches. Pat had, I think, 3 catches. Jalen Warren had 3. Then he fed Allen Robinson, Calvin Austin, and George Pickens. He got everyone involved. That's what you want to see I know I personally was really hyping up all the receivers they had added this offseason and, coming back from injury in Calvin Austin's case, and to see everyone getting touches, probably in some of their opinion, they're still not getting enough touches. But to see Kenny distributing the ball to all the big names, that's really encouraging. And I know Pat only had 3 catches, and 2 of them, I think, were on the same drive, including the touchdown pass. But Pat Fryermuth, I think, is someone they really need to get involved in this offense. And I think maybe the biggest takeaway from me, maybe not the biggest, but one of the main takeaways I'd like to highlight is, they got Pat Fryermuth in it, and he was looking like that big name, reliable tight end that I think a lot of people wanted to see him become, and what he's looked like in the past and the opportunities he's had.
Yeah, I think, Nick, I agree with you definitely in terms of the receiving core getting all, incorporated. But I think coming into this game, you knew the Steelers had a big chance against the Raiders. I mean, Las Vegas is not that good. I mean, the offense up to this point is only scoring 15 points per game. So it was a good chance for the Steelers to, put into motion what they're looking for the rest of the year. And the defense, as we talked about, lived up to that same standard we saw against Cleveland. TJ Watt, another 2 sacks, got a couple other guys in D-line incorporated as well, making plays. Like Wallace with 2 picks, Peterson with a pick, even though it's just a floater from Garoppolo. But I think the other thing, 2 things on offense, talked about the receivers getting involved, but you have to give a little bit of credit to Matt Canada. I mean, the game plan was much better. I think the execution obviously was way better, offensively, especially from Kenny Pickett, but they rolled him out a lot. They got him on the move, and he was able to hit his targets. That Pat Fryermuth touchdown was huge. I mean, rolling out to his left. I mean, his going out opposite of the way he usually rolls out. So, I mean, to be able to connect, right in stride with Pat Fryermuth, I mean, that was huge. But also, another thing, Kenny Pickett, 2 passing touchdowns. It's his first time in his career that he had 2 passing touchdowns in a game. So, I mean, that's, I think, another step, a confidence booster for Kenny Pickett to be able to go out in a game and do that. I mean, against the Raiders, I mean, the defense isn't that great, but regardless, I mean, that's a big step in his career and his progression. So I think this was a big game for the Steelers to, get some things in a line and get ready to start moving forward into the thick of their schedule.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, Pickett should have been picked off by Peters when he threw the ball right at him. But I like to think that was Hayward running the wrong route. Regardless, though, Kenny might have wanted to notice that his back was facing him when he threw that ball. But I won't harp on the one thing that he did glaringly wrong the entire game there. But yeah, very positive game against, I almost called him Oakland Ethan, you son of a gun. And he fist bumps. The nerve of this guy almost makes me mess up, and then he fist bumps like he's proud of it. But yeah, a great game. And now we're moving on to what's been deemed as a trap game before the season even started, and everyone thought they were going to win the Super Bowl. And that would be this week's contest against the Houston Texans. CJ Stroud's looked very good. And I think this could be a very good test for Pittsburgh. Not like they haven't been tested already, playing 2 of the best defenses in the league, but I think this could be a very good game here in the sense of they're heavily favored in a game finally. I haven't looked at the line. I'm assuming they're favored substantially or at least moderately. I think this could be a good game where they go in and actually show they can get the job done efficiently, I guess, in layman's terms, in a basic way to say that.
Yeah, just looking at how this Steelers defense matches up against CJ Stroud and the Texans offense, Houston's going to be dealing with a lot of injuries up front on the offensive line. So it's going to bode well for the Steelers front 7 in this one against the Texans. So you should be looking for more of the same from the Steelers there. But obviously Stroud has played a lot better than I thought he was going to play, especially against Jacksonville this past week, and just how he was able to just command the offense and his success that he had. But yeah, I mean, just looking at the Steelers defense, that you should expect more of the same from them, especially against the very young and inexperienced Houston Texans team. This is a game that Pittsburgh should win, barring any unforeseen circumstances. But you always got to put in, how is this offense going to perform? How is this offense going to react? after a pretty solid week? Are you going to be able to build upon what you improved upon against Las Vegas back in week 3, or are you still going to have some growing pains and you're going to take a step back from where you were? It's yet to be seen. The big thing for this offense now is going to be that consistency, and I think the Steelers' offense has a great chance this week to continue to take a step forward. This Houston defense, they aren't world beaters like some of the top defenses in the league that Pittsburgh has already started to face this year. So it's a good opportunity again to get Pickett, some more reps and to get him more involved and continue to spread the wealth to his receivers, because I think that's going to be the biggest key, especially with Deontay Johnson still out, is to be able to move the ball around and really get your receivers and as well as your tight ends involved in this offense. And I think if they're able to do that, they're gonna have a lot of success against Houston on Sunday.
Yeah, I think, the one thing coming out of that Raiders game, I mean, one last thing to add on to that for Pickett's sake, the one thing he didn't do, he didn't make a mistake. I mean, that we've seen maybe the first couple games. I know, Nick, you mentioned the Marcus Peters throw, but he didn't make any mistakes. He threw the ball away a lot more, avoiding any dangerous play. So I think the same thing going into Houston. Steelers are favored by 3 points, and I'm sure that line came down after Houston beat Jacksonville pretty thoroughly. I mean, a 37 points on the board for Houston. So, I mean, pretty big game and a surprising game. I mean, Jacksonville is, arguably the favorite in that division, and to go out there and beat them. But Pickett in the offense, I mean, same thing, can't make mistakes. And Ethan, as you mentioned, I mean, this defense isn't anything special. So back-to-back weeks, you get defenses that aren't that great following, those opening 2 games that they saw really tough defenses. So, I mean, it's another step for Pickett in the offense to continue their progression. But the other thing is, I mean, the Steelers oftentimes we've seen, I mean, they play these teams where they're favored and, in Houston's case, I mean, they're not supposed to win, and Steelers have some of those games. I mean, they're calling it a trap game, but it could be that, potentially. I mean, Houston after last week showed a lot of good signs, a lot of good things. And CJ Stroud, he's the first player in NFL history to go through 3 games with 906 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no picks. So, I mean, he is really showing his stuff right now. And as the top pick in the draft, I mean, Houston went and made 2 big splashes early on and getting Will Anderson on the defensive side as well. And he's been really good for the Texans. So, there's some players the Steelers are going to have to watch out for. And I think, offensively for the Texans, I mean, they're going to have a lot to offer against the Steelers, which could be tough. It's going to be a tough test. So we'll see.
When some people think of the term happy feet, they think of the biographical film about penguins. When I hear the term happy feet, I think about Kenny Pickett. And we saw what can happen when he stays in the pocket against the Raiders. He made some very strong throws. He took his bruises, took his lumps, got back up, and it was encouraging. But as Nate touched on, he still kind of needs to get better at that. He still likes to run at the first sign of trouble. And I think this Texans team, not discrediting them at all, as Nate mentioned, they have some talented pieces, including rookies on that defense who have worked out fairly well through 3 games. I think this is a game where he really needs to, cement that he is making strides in these certain areas where he's, been a little lackluster, downright, wavery. I don't know. I thought I was going to sneeze and that threw me off. I'm so sorry. I suck at this all of a sudden. I think that's a game where he has to show that he's making some sort of improvement, not only because we can, granted game 4's early, but, we're past the point of saying how the season just started. He needs to show that he's making improvement, making strides now in year 2. And you're playing a team who isn't good. No, not to discredit them again, but I think this is a good game where Kenny Pickett has to show that he is making improvement and significant improvement in the areas where people have been very questionable about his talent so far. I'm going to actually go sneeze now, so give me 1 second.
Yeah, I just think, Kenny just needs to stay in the pocket because, like Nick said, you just saw what he was able to do when he was just able to stand in and just make those throws. Obviously, when you go out on the run, you're not going to be as accurate as you would staying planted in the pocket, or at least getting your feet set and planted. But I mean, Kenny does well on the run as well. But when you see him on the run compared to how he is in the pocket and just the throws that he's able to make and just be able to be calm and composed there, it's just going to only make the Steelers offense a lot better and not as one-dimensional as you see a guy rolling out to your right and only having that ability to throw to the right side and only have a few options where if you stand in the pocket and stand strong in the pocket and have the ability to make those throws and make the reads that you need to make, you're going to open a lot more avenues there on that offensive side. And I think we saw that Sunday night when he was just able to stay in there and just really have a lot of success. Obviously, the offensive line is still growing and molding, but it's something that you want to continue to see out of Pickett as the season progresses because it's something that can be very, very valuable for the Steelers offense.
And I think, potentially in this game, if we want to get into predictions a little bit, I mean, the Steelers, I think
Why not?
This might be a game, though. I mean, you might see this as more of a high-scoring game. I mean, the Steelers have played, in these low-scoring games, especially under Kenny Pickett, where they haven't thrown up a lot of points. But, I mean, looking at this Texans defense, this might be a game where we see Pickett really break out, have maybe another 2-touchdown game. But for the Texans, the way C.J. Stroud's been playing, but also, I mean, the running game for Houston, I mean, pretty strong with Singletary and Dameon Pierce, who had a nice season last year. The Steelers have the 31st rush defense in the league, and they've struggled against that so far. I mean, they were able to hold the Raiders to about, I think it was 62 yards. I mean, Josh Jacobs really didn't do anything last week for the most part, but I think Houston's two-dimensional offense could be tough for the Steelers. I mean, the biggest thing is we're gonna have to look at TJ Watt again and some of those edge rushers to get into Stroud, but Stroud's looked pretty poised so far through the first 3 games, so I think this might be a higher scoring game. Now, if you're a betting man, don't listen to my bets because I'm 0 for 3 so far on the money line. But I think this game, the Steelers come away 31-27. A little bit of higher scoring game for the offense for Pittsburgh.
Well, Ethan, what's your prediction then?
I think
Nate lays it out there.
Yeah, I think it's going to be another tight one as usual for the Steelers. I think they're going to be tight all year because that's just how they play. They just play in those one possession games. I think I'm going to go around that same score. I still think it's going to be a defensive game. I mean, I still think Pickett will show his flashes and the offense will still continue to grow, but I still think it's going to be a lower scoring game. Get me 20-17 Pittsburgh going into a big divisional matchup against Baltimore in week 5.
I like Nate's stat there about the Steelers' rush defense. One thing I've thought about is they let quarterbacks scramble quite a bit. When they have good coverage, it's not uncommon to see the other quarterback. This happened with Deshaun Watson a few times, kind of scamper away, but hopefully C.J. Stroud don't grab a handful of face mask every time he scrambles. But I'm excited to see Stroud, use his legs and see if he can, exploit the Steelers defense, see if he has any confidence in himself to kind of, scramble and scatter around like that. That's just a side thought. Regardless, though, the Steelers always make it interesting. You two have touched on that, so I'm not going to go on some long tangent about it. It's going to be close. I almost went to bed at the start of the 4th quarter because I was exhausted in the Vegas game, and it ended up being one of the most heart-wrenching games I've ever watched in my life. That's just how the Steelers play. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to end 34-28 Steelers, though, in a very close ball game that probably has a late Houston touchdown and some whack-ass penalty or wacky play where they get the ball back again and have a chance to actually tie it. But the Steelers miraculously walk out with a victory from NRG Stadium down there in Houston. But that means now that predictions are sent away, it's time to talk about the Pitt Panthers. That's right. I thought Ethan was going to have a much more excitable reaction to talk about Phil Jurkovec, but apparently not. Speaking of Phil Jurkovec, a big talking point from that game against North Carolina, he was unfortunately injured, and now the Panthers will try to end this losing skid by going to Virginia Tech, taking on the Hokies. Nate, Ethan's going to be there. I don't know if he told you this yet, but he's going down there, not as a credentialed reporter for us especially, because no chance in hell that's going to happen. But he'll go down there. He'll have a few Pabst Blue Ribbons, and he's going to see what Virginia Tech's all about. But Nate, what are your taking away headed into this matchup?
I'm a little disappointed because there was a real good chance I was going to head down there as well, but some things didn't happen, and Pitt's off to a rough start, and yeah. Anyways,
He's a fair
yeah, I
weather
mean,
fan, is what he's getting at. If they were doing good,
yeah,
he'd go.
basically,
But
yeah. That's the moral of the story. Anyways, but no, I mean, Pitt starting the game against North Carolina looked pretty competent. Like they looked good with Phil Dracovic in there, and if Phil Dracovic's healthy, who knows what they do against Virginia Tech. But um, it was 14-14 there for the most part, and then the turning point basically in this game was about 8 minutes left in the second quarter. Phil Dracovic, really made a bad decision. It was 3rd and 12, I believe, and he was pressured and he was dropped all the way back down on the 1 yard line. The play started at the 23-yard line of Pitt, dropped to the 1 yard line. On the ensuing punt, North Carolina brings it to the house. So that was the turning point. And from there, I mean, the Pitt offense stalled out the rest of the game. I mean, Djokovic was hurt, but I mean, Ethan and I talked about it last week. I mean, we knew it was going to be a high scoring game from North Carolina, and that's exactly what we saw. Drake May, I mean, Heisman contender, threw a touchdown with his left hand. I mean, come on. I mean, he was just balling out all over Pitt, and the Panthers couldn't keep up, and that's kind of what was expected, but didn't think Djokovic was going to get injured, and he looked pretty decent. Was 11 for 15 so far, in that game before he got hurt, and then Christian Veillere came in, threw 2 interceptions, fumbled a ball on a poor handoff. It was just a mess after Djokovic went out, and that's tough to say for a lot of, people who have been watching Pitt so far because Dracovic has been really bad. And he finally, showed some competency and he gets hurt. And North Carolina just, didn't let up. I mean, they started racking up points. And, at the end of the night, through a cold, rainy evening, I mean, it was a tough game to swallow for Pitt.
And I know I give Phil a lot of slack on this program here. I know I do. I still will. But you can just see what Pitt has to offer in terms of a quarterback after that. And you saw it on Saturday. And you saw when Phil can be on, he can be a pretty solid option for this Pitt Panther team. We haven't seen that so far this year, which has made fans very frustrated. I cannot talk tonight, but made fans very frustrated in these first couple of weeks of the season because he came in surrounded. There was this hometown kid, a lot of hype surrounding him. Had some success at Boston College before he transferred home to Pitt. So there was a lot of hype coming into him, and he didn't live up to that hype those first few weeks of the season. Then you see him show some confidence. He didn't do anything crazy, anything out of this world, outlandish, but you saw that he was a solid quarterback under center Saturday night against UNC. And then when he gets injured, you bring in the transfer from Penn State, the Canadian. I think he's Canadian. Pretty sure he's Canadian. You saw him come in there Saturday night, and he's still young, obviously, but there wasn't a lot that went well after Phil went out, and that's when UNC really took advantage. So if Phil's healthy on Saturday night, like you say, there's no reason why they should not ride with Phil in this game against Virginia Tech. And I know I'm sure you're going to touch on it a little bit, but Virginia Tech is a struggling team in the ACC right now. Just lost to Marshall this past week. So this is an opportunity.
Thanks to that damn drone shot.
Yeah, that was sick, though. That was a sick drone shot. But
I couldn't believe they got like a verbal warning, was it, for doing the drone shot? That was insane.
I think they might have got fined too by the Sun Belt.
I thought I read the Sun Belt gave them like a stern warning or some really stupid language, but they might have fined them.
That was just crazy.
They're playing for wins, not clicks down there in Marshall.
Exactly.
We are Marshall, baby.
But yeah, I mean, Pitt's going up against a struggling Virginia Tech team who hasn't had a lot of success this season. And this is the opportunity for Pitt to really right the ship and get their first win against a football bowl subdivision team, not an FCS school this time around. And it's a good opportunity for them to really take steps forward in the right direction. It's a primetime game on the good old ACC network. So you're going to have some eyes on that game as well. But
Gonna be looking for Ethan in the crowd.
exactly. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting game for them. And hopefully it's one where Pat Narduzzi can finally say, let's move on and let's continue to move forward this season and try to right the ship and hopefully get to where this team wants to be and needs to be for where they want to be at this year.
I'm not saying Pitt doesn't travel well, but they're not good. If something bad happens in this game and Ethan happens to be wearing a Pitt Panther shirt, hoodie, they might get a good reaction shot there on the ACC network, whatever channel they're playing on. They might get a good little reaction shot of old Ethan just doing this or something. So keep your eyes peeled if you happen to catch that game. Keep your eyes peeled for young Morrison out there looking disheveled the minute something bad happens to Pitt.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past me to do something crazy or funky and end up on live television just
Wow.
because Phil Dracovic threw his 4th interception of the evening.
Nate, do you want to give us one of your patented score predictions, or are we just gonna not care about that tonight?
No, I'll give a score prediction. And last thing I'll say is, this is a game for Pitt that they need to win. I mean, I don't think there's been a bigger game that Pitt needs to win in terms of saving a season. I mean, they dropped the 1-4 against, arguably the worst team outside of Virginia in the ACC. I mean, that's tough because they do not have a very easy schedule moving forward. They have one of the toughest. I mean, they still have Notre Dame and Florida State, 2 top 10 teams, potentially with Notre Dame if they slide back in. But this is a big matchup for Pitt, and they can't drop the 1-4. So I think, Pitt just does just enough. They've won the last 3 times against Virginia Tech, and I think that continues. I think it's very close. And I think it's defense, and I think Ben Sauls is going to have to be called upon once again, kick a couple field goals, and I think Pitt wins 23-21. But I think, the ground game does just enough. Hammond played pretty well against UNC, 83 yards and a touchdown. So I think you look to him again, especially if Drakovic's not going to play. You're going to go – it's going to be a big ground game if you don't see Phil Dracovic in. So 23-21 Pitt, they have to win this game.
All right. That means we can promote next week now. I thought I was done having allergy attacks or whatever on this show, but they keep swaying my thought process. That falling down the stairs today didn't help my head. I might be concussed. We're going to talk about next week. Pirates will be done, which means we're going to talk about their season. We've neglected Bob Nutting's crew these last couple weeks, and probably for good reason. But actually, those Buccos did improve on last year, so we'll touch on that next week. Preseason's in full swing for the NHL. We'll give the Penguins some love as well. We might even get resident expert Jack O'Brien on in a pre-recorded video, I might add. Kind of like when The Rock did via satellite segments when he was about to wrestle John Cena at WrestleMania back in my youth. But he'll be on in some facet, I like to think. So that's what you have to look forward to next week. In addition, we're working on new merch. And it's going to be huge. It's going to be fantastic. We're excited to show it to you all. Don't know if that'll be a next week thing, but I'll have more for you on that next week. And now that I'm done with yet another ramble that you don't care about, it's time for a final thought, which we are going to rename Last Call for the future. There we go. For the future is not in the title. From this point on, we're going to call it Last Call. So Nate, start us off.
I'm looking forward, I will say, to next week talking about the Pens. I think, there's some excitement with Eric Carlson and Riley Smith brought in and the whole, front office rearranging. So I'm excited to look forward to that. They've got a couple preseason games already in, and, NHL season's right around the corner.
Damn straight. Ethan, you know how this works.
For me, going down to good old Blacksburg, Virginia this weekend. Just hoping that both teams have fun. I have no dog in this fight. So I'm just going down there. Hope both teams have fun and watch some good football. But yeah, excited to talk Buccos next week as they wrap up their season. And there were a lot of dark spots in that season this year, but overall, I think it was an improvement for them. So I can't wait to take a deeper dive into that and where to turn now after an improvement of sorts this year and what the team and front office needs to do in the offseason to really take that next step and maybe compete for a wild card or playoff spot next season.
All right. That must mean it's my turn. This is going to be a tough one to get through. I debated on what I would actually talk about for a while, especially because Ryan Day attacked Lou Holtz, and I'm a Notre Dame fan, and that just seemed like it was something I needed to talk about. But frankly, most of you probably don't care about that. So I'll talk about something that you probably care about even less because you forget it exists, but it's a pressing issue. The Pirates' lease is up on PNC Park at the end of the decade, and while it's not an immediate concern, some people are talking about it already. The Penguins were bought by the Fenway Sports Group. Whether Pittsburghers want to admit it or not, there's some fear that we might be losing a team or two. Whether it's justified or not, I don't know. But despite that, I always thought I could have comfort in knowing that the Pittsburgh Maulers of Canton would always be here to stay. But now I'm being told that the USFL and XFL might be merging. Apparently it's imminent, and the USFL filed the trademark for National Spring Football League or something. And it makes me sad to think that young Pittsburghers won't be able to get in the car with their family and drive to Canton, Ohio to watch subpar professional football. It's just ridiculous to me. Everyone should have the opportunity to drive a state over to watch their professional football team play in a game in their hub city. It makes no sense to get rid of this team. Who else from Pittsburgh's going to throw out the first pitch at Cleveland Guardians games if they shut down? That seems absurd to me. So I hope, for the benefit of young Yinzers everywhere, that the Pittsburgh Maulers aren't one of the teams that gets chopped if these two leagues combine. And if not, it'll be a dark, cold day in hell until I stop fighting to bring them back to the city that they once belonged. And whether that's Pittsburgh or Canton, I can't give you an answer. But I hope they stick around. And we hope you stick around after this shitstorm of an episode to listen to next week's episode of Stranded in Pittsburgh. Because we might not be coherent. And sometimes we might be worse than incoherent. But you know what? You're going to laugh, and we're going to give you a hootin', hollering good time. I'm going to go take 4 Benadryl, and I'm going to come back next week and be so chipper, so eager to talk about Bob Nutting, so eager to talk about the Penguins. You're not going to know what hit you in the face. It's not Yo Mama's podcast. That's what's happening. And it's not Yo Mama's house. That's up to Ethan. This has been Stranded in Pittsburgh. We'll see you next week. Take care of yourselves.